And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again, and today I am just doing a quick and dirty video of a Watchmen reading guide. Now keep in mind this is not a reading order, this is going to be a reading guide showing you all the different comics featuring Watchmen, and I'll talk about that in a fair bit of detail. But if what you're after is a reading order, in other words, if you're one of the humans that's going to contact me in the comments saying, should I read this issue before that issue, or this panel before this panel, that's not the sort of guide this is. What you want is a reading order designed for type P more compulsive readers, and I'll cover that right at the end of the video, so feel free to skip ahead to that. Another thing to point out is I am aware I have done a video on my channel talking about how I don't like the Watchmen comics, which I don't, and saying why it's okay not to like the Watchmen comics, which it is. So with that out of the way, let's dive straight into my reading guide for the Watchmen comics. And here we have it. This is my map or my guide to the Watchmen universe. Let's zoom out for a second. That's the whole thing. It doesn't quite fit on a single page in a nice expanded kind of way, so I'm just going to zoom out for a second, show you all this, and what I'm going to talk you through when I zoom in and go through it in a lot of detail are what all these issues are and the recommended kind of general order to read them all in. What I will point out is the reason I'm doing this is kind of an offshoot to my DC Rebirth series, which I'm currently putting together, and I'm going to be throwing together a few videos over the next couple of months, which are just going to be offshoots off the DC Rebirth work. But this is kind of a self-contained thing, and it occurred to me it'd be quite useful. I went down a bit of a rabbit hole of research when I was reading this, and I thought, hey, what's the harm in just covering it and discussing it with people? So, as you can see here, it starts off at the top with Before Watchmen, and then there are three sections underneath it, which I'm going to call the Snyder Reboot, the More Vision, and the Rebirth arc. And what I'm going to do is talk you through each of these three lower sections in a moment after I've talked through the Before Watchmen segment. So no further ado, let's zoom in a little bit. So what we have here at the top is Before Watchmen. Now, these comics were all released a long time after Watchmen came out. Watchmen came out in 1985. The Before Watchmen series came out only a few years ago. The thing to keep in mind about Before Watchmen is that it's actually a whole series of mini-series issues with relatively modernized art, as you can see from the covers that I've picked here. There are loads of variant covers, and all the writers that have written these are relatively modern writers like J.M. Straczynski and people like that. However, they are all set before the main Watchmen series written by Alan Moore, and as a result they should all be read before that as well. If you want to do a comprehensive reading order, none of these are essential, I should point that out. So no further ado, let's dive into what happened in the Before Watchmen era. Right, well, starting off here, we have there. Watchmen, The End Is Nigh. This is actually a video game. It was a video game on the PS3 and the Xbox 360. It's not backwardly compatible to the Xbox One or the Xbox Series X, so if you want to play it, the only way to play it is to pick up the PS3 version. I haven't actually played it myself, so I don't know if I'm recommending it or not, but what I will say is that it is set before the 1985 Watchmen series by Alan Moore. At the same time as that, we've got a whole bunch of these miniseries. So we've got the Minutemen miniseries written by Darwin Cook, which is part of Before Watchmen. We've got the Dollar Bill One Shot, which is written by Len Wein. That goes there. As you can see here, we have the Silk Spectre series by Darwin Cook. Then we get into the J.M. Straczynski stuff. This is Night Owl, which is a miniseries there. Then we have the Comedian miniseries by Brian Azzarello. The Moloch two-part series. Moloch is kind of a bad guy in the Before Watchmen mythos. He's referred to in the Watchmen comic, but only fleetingly as someone who has been vanquished, and this is where you see that happen. And that's written by J.M. Straczynski. That takes us over to the Rorschach miniseries written by Brian Azzarello, the Ozymandias miniseries written by Len Wein, and then again J.M. Straczynski writing Dr. Manhattan here. All of this cover artwork I actually love. It's all done by Jim Lee. It's not indicative of what the actual artwork inside the issues is like, unfortunately, just to make you aware of that. But yeah, those are the miniseries. If it was up to me, I would say you can read these in any order you like. You don't have to read them in any particular order. However, I've sequenced the 9 of them in this particular order because this is recommended by someone called Crushing Crisis, who I'm going to talk about a lot more at the end of the video, who does a lot of super detailed reading orders rather than reading guides for the Watchmen universe and for comics in general, to be honest. So if you are going to read them and you're like, oh, I have to read them in a particular order, this is the order I'd read them in. Minutemen at the start, ending with Dr. Manhattan. And the rationale for reading these 9 series in that order is because that's the chronological order in a linear sequence of when they end. So, for example, Minutemen ends in the 60s, whereas Dr. Manhattan ends in 1985, just as the full Watchmen maxi series by Alan Moore commences. In terms of when you're going to play the game, I have no idea. I haven't played it, and it's kind of a standalone thing in and of itself. But if you want to be a completionist, it is there. As I said, there are these 9 miniseries in Before Watchmen, and then what I have here is actually the reading order of the Crimson Corsair backup stories. Now, the Crimson Corsair backup stories are just a couple of pages that are interspersed, or rather at the end of lots of issues of Before Watchmen. You can see the sequence here. It starts off with Before Watchmen Minutemen number 1, and it ends with Before Watchmen Moloch number 2. But this is a long series of 2-page, 3-page excerpts of one long continuous story about the Crimson Corsair. If you're wondering who the Crimson Corsair is, it's kind of a retro, even by these standards, a retro pirate story, swashbuckling pirate era type stuff, and was actually referenced in the original Watchmen by Alan Moore, which we'll talk about in a moment. So Before Watchmen tried to do a similar thing and have this story interspersed through all the Before Watchmen issues. I would not recommend reading them in this piecemeal bit by bit way. Instead, I would recommend actually picking up a trade paperback which would have it in them. And what I should point out is that all of the Before Watchmen issues are collected in 4 trade paperbacks, one of which does have the Crimson Corsair backup pages, all collected into one singular, coherent, continuous story that you can read there if you want to. Okay, hopefully that's helpful. That is the Before Watchmen sequence, and no matter how you want to read the next 3 things we're going to talk about, if you want to do a completionist read through of the entire Watchmen comic universe or cinematic universe or whatever you want to call it, then you should start off with Before Watchmen, those 9 series, the Watchmen game, and that Crimson Corsair spin-off. What that then takes us to, as you can see here, are the 3 bits that follow it, and there are 3 distinct continuations or 3 distinct universes that spin out of Before Watchmen. Obviously, we'll start off with the one in the middle, which is Alan Moore's. So this is the Moore vision. Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. This is Watchmen, 1985. This is the New York Times bestseller. This is the massively overrated and slightly pretentious comic that I'm personally not a fan of, which everyone says you should have in your collection. Everyone says you should read it. I agree, you probably should read it, or it'd be a good read to get under your belt, but I don't know. It's a classic. That doesn't mean it's fun now. As you can see, what we have here is the Watchmen. People refer to it as a graphic novel. It's not a graphic novel. It's a collected edition because it collects 12 individually published single issues that were published monthly. But yeah, the Watchmen collector's edition on the left. On the right, I've just got a couple of cover pages for the Watchmen animated cartoon, which actually came out in 2024 in 2 feature-length parts. So you've got Watchmen Chapter 1 and Watchmen Chapter 2. The reason I put these together is that the animated cartoon is a really limpid, almost identical beat-for-beat, note-for-note version of Alan Moore's Watchmen. And as a result, yeah, you can read the comic or you can watch the animated movie. To be honest, I'd recommend reading the comic because if you're going to go for it, you might as well go all in. But yeah, they're both the exact same storyline done in the exact same way. And as a result, you may be interested in seeing them accordingly. So there we are, the Moore vision. As a sequel to the Moore vision, from 1985, and this is Alan Moore's Watchmen. The next thing that follows on from Alan Moore's Watchmen is actually the HBO series Watchmen, written or produced, I think, by Damon Lindelof, the guy who took over Lost from J.J. Abrams and ran it into the ground. The Watchmen TV show is a one-season TV show by HBO. It's available on Blu-ray. It's available on streaming services. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's got a pretty good cast. People like Jeremy Irons are in it. It's pretty well put together, and it does directly. Well, I say directly. It definitively follows on from the ending of Watchmen, which has a very particular twist ending right at the end, which is also incorporated here. And the way to think about it is that that twist ending has occurred, and no one realizes all the nuances of that twist ending. I'm not going to spoil it here. This is spoiler free. And then 30 years later, you got the Watchmen TV show happening. Once you watch the Watchmen TV show, if you want to carry on in this kind of Moore universe by Alan Moore, then the final thing then is Rorschach. This is a comic. It's Black Label. It's a 12-issue maxi series written by Tom King, who is a DC writer of some notorious renown now. And this 12-issue maxi series is collected in a single hardcover. It is theoretically, as you read it, you can see that it is set sometime just after the Watchmen HBO series. I'm personally not a big fan of it. I'm going to keep my opinion to myself at this point. But this comic here is really the reason why I made this map at all, because I read this as a Black Label comic, and then I started working backwards and thinking to myself, exactly where does this fit in as part of wider Watchmen? So because I've been doing my DC Rebirth guide, I came across this, and then, as I mentioned, I slightly went down the rabbit hole. Alright, so those are, again, the three universes we have here. Let's move to the left, and again, read all the before Watchmen stuff, and if you're not interested in Alan Moore's vision, then you can go here to the left, and what we have here is the Snyder reboot. I fought the instinct of calling this the Snyderverse, because that obviously has its own term within the DC Extended Universe. So I'm calling this the Snyder reboot, and it's not really a reboot so much as this is just Zack Snyder's 4-hour massive epic movie of Watchmen, adapting the Watchmen comic into a movie. Frankly, I think this is great. I personally think it's better than the comic, but the reason that this is a distinct and very different universe to the ones we saw here, and keep in mind here we have got the animated universe, the Watchmen Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, is that at the end of the Snyder reboot, or the Snyder Watchmen, that twist ending that I mentioned to you, that doesn't happen. Zack Snyder, there's kind of like a big reveal and a big ending, but it's a completely different idea behind it that Zack Snyder does. The big ending at the end of Watchmen is very different in the Snyder movie. Personally, I prefer it in the Snyder movie. I think it's great. I think actually the movie as a whole works out fantastically. The acting is fantastic. The direction is fantastic. And the change to what I felt was a bit of a weird ending by Alan Moore is much better here. I massively prefer the Snyder reboot. But that's just me. Opinions do vary. Nothing followed on from the Snyder reboot. So none of the subsequent materials released in the Watchmen, I don't know, kind of franchise universe, none of them went ahead and followed on from that change to the twist ending that Zack Snyder did. All the before Watchmen stuff doesn't mention it at all. In fact, doesn't mention the ending of Watchmen at all for obvious reasons. And then the stuff that came afterwards here, so both the HBO Watchmen and also the animated universe Watchmen and Rorschach, none of them follow on from the Snyder different ending. They all follow on from the Alan Moore ending. Speaking of which, that takes us to the third bit, where if you read the Alan Moore and Watchmen stuff, and then you think to yourself, "Oh, I'm quite interested in where to go next," but I'm not interested in HBO's Watchmen. I'm not interested in Rorschach. Instead, you're actually interested in the intersection of Watchmen and DC Rebirth. This is the direction I'd recommend you go. You'd read Watchmen, or watch the animated movie, or both, whatever. And then after that, you would go into the New 52 and DC Rebirth. And that is where this story then takes you. Now, everything on the right here that I'm calling the Rebirth arc, everything on the right here, is based on the idea that the twist ending from Alan Moore's Watchmen does happen. However, this storyline takes the ending in a slightly different direction. I'm not going to spoil it here, but whilst in the HBO series and the Rorschach series, everyone kind of goes, oh, that's what happened and it's terrible. That's the amazing shock ending of Watchmen. In the DC Rebirth vein, if you want to go down that route, actually it's slightly different. People are aware that there was a twist, people are aware that there have been lies and conspiracies, and it basically goes down a slightly different path. I apologise for being slightly veiled here, but I want to keep it spoiler free. When I do my DC Rebirth guide, I will have some mild spoilers in that. But for now, I'm just going to say to everyone here, just trust me. If you're going to read The Watchmen, but you don't want to go down the HBO Rorschach route, is there New 52 and DC Rebirth. Now, I am conscious the New 52 is 3,600 issues, and DC Rebirth is 2,800 issues. There are reading orders online that would tell you exactly what DC Rebirth issues you need to read, and what those reading orders will talk about is they will say you need to read the DC Rebirth one shot, as you can see up here. You then need to read the Batman Flash crossover The Button, which you can see here. You then need to read the Doomsday Clock maxi series, 12 issues written by Jeff Johns, which you can see in the middle. And it even recommends that you then read Flashpoint Beyond, which is actually published after the DC Rebirth universe. I have concerns and caveats about reading order recommendations like that, and I'll explain why. Whilst Watchmen itself does dovetail quite neatly into the DC Rebirth one-shot and the start of DC Rebirth, the fingerprints of what's happening in the Watchmen comics are felt throughout the New 52, although I will be honest, I think reading 3,500 issues of the New 52 is a bit much if you're just interested in the Watchmen. That said, you should definitely read the DC Rebirth one-shot, which is what this image is from. But then in terms of DC Rebirth, quite a lot of the series tangentially and gently touch Watchmen. It's not just Batman and Flash. Teen Titans do, Detective Comics do, Superman does. There's a lots of other stories where they have like very careful Easter egg style nods towards Watchmen. And I think just reading Batman Flash The Button as an event isn't really the best way to do that unless you're in a rush for some reason. Either way, all the DC Rebirth stuff then climaxes with Doomsday Clock, which is the end of the Watchmen intersection with the DC Rebirth universe. So you would definitely need to read that and end there. In terms of going further to Flashpoint and Beyond, I honestly don't know. I haven't read Flashpoint Beyond and I don't plan on reading it anytime soon because it sits outside the DC Rebirth universe. The one thing I do know about Flashpoint Beyond is it does feature some of the new and original characters created by Jeff Johns and introduced in Doomsday Clock, but I'm not convinced that's a reason per se to read Flashpoint Beyond. That's why it's greyed out here. Anyway, there we have it. Just panning out there. As you can see, you got Before Watchmen at the top, just to recap. Read all of those if you're interested in the wider Watchmen universe, but none of them are essential, nor is the video game, nor are the Crimson Corsair backups. And then if you want to get into Watchmen, undoubtedly you want to start off with Alan Moore's Watchmen here, which is the 12-issue original series collected there. An alternative is the Zack Snyder movie, but that's an entirely different sort of continuity with a different ending and so on. And either way, if you look at Alan Moore's one, you can either go down to Watchmen and Rorschach, or you can go into the Rebirth era. Alright, hopefully that was helpful. And what I'm going to show you next is that if you didn't think that was helpful, and you were like, oh, that's far too vague, and I want to know it page by page, issue by issue, panel by panel, then I'm about to talk about that now. And now what we're looking at is the website Crushing Crisis, which is one I'm a big fan of, and I'm very supportive of, and I often talk about in my videos as something that people should really check out for themselves. Now, I will point out that Crushing Crisis has a very different ethos to me when it comes to comics, in that Crisis, the person who runs the whole thing, is way more detailed and way more knowledgeable than I will ever be. So this is just one of his publicly available pages. Crisis has got loads and loads of publicly available guides, and also many that are behind a Patreon. And I would strongly recommend supporting Crushing Crisis via the Patreon when you go on the website. But what I will say is, here we have the Watchmen Definitive Guide, and if you felt that the one that I just talked you through was a little bit lacking, this one definitely is not. It's got a great overview of what Watchmen is here, and then it dives into all sorts of stuff about the cast, the history, who wrote it, what the different sort of main characters represent, and so on. And as well as that, and this is the fantastic thing about the website, is it also covers how to get hold of every single different version of the trade paperback collection. So deluxe editions, international editions, compact editions, all the different hardcovers. Now, Watchmen has been a classic since 1985 and has been published in a bajillion different formats. All of them are here, all of them are linked here through affiliate links, and really useful up-to-date links of sort of where to go to get whatever version tickles your fancy, essentially. Um, as well as that, it covers a bunch of stuff that I haven't done, like the annotated edition, the complete motion comic. There's also a few other things, like the unauthorized Watchmen chronology, which I didn't even know about until I started looking at this particular guide and I started planning my video. And as well as that, he's got a whole load of things about additional appearances, even to really subtle ones, like here we have Rorschach in the background of a panel in an issue. Like, absolutely wild, incredibly impressive. Not the sort of thing that I do in my reading sort of reading orders, or reading guides rather. This is very much an really, really explicit, really detailed, really fastidious reading order, as opposed to the more kind of loose reading guides that I do. Crisis also did a great thing talking about the Watchmen movie in a lot of detail, all the different cuts of it, all the different things that are available, and then dives into Before Watchmen. Now, I did mention earlier that Watchmen is available in different collected editions, and here, as you can see, the Before Watchmen collection with Ozymandias is the one that collects all the Crimson Corsair stuff as well. The guide that I got, or well, the idea that I had for my map of having them in a particular sequence, if you're quite obsessed about it, literally comes from this bit here, where it says in terms of reading order, this is what Crisis would recommend and why. I personally don't care, but if you're the sort of person that does care, this is exactly how you would do it. And then there's stuff about Watchmen in DC Rebirth, which is covered here in just some sort of top level detail up to and including Doomsday Clock. Flashpoint Beyond isn't included here into this reading order, and frankly, that's one of the reasons why I don't want to include it either, because if Crisis didn't think is good enough to include, I don't want to think is good enough to include. One thing I will say is, hopefully you do find this really, really helpful. Please do check out the Crushing Crisis website. It's just an amazing resource of information. If, however, you go on it and you go, this still isn't detailed enough for me, I want to know an exact panel by panel, sentence by sentence, issue by issue breakdown of exactly what the best order to read it in is, then you and I are not the same sort of comic reader. I'm a type J reader, whereas a type P reader, and especially an extreme type P reader, is what you're talking about, someone who wants to know the exact sequence to do every tiny thing in advance. I don't know where to get resources like that for you. What you might want to do is to go on something like Reddit or something like that and find someone who can offer you that reading order. I am not interested in that. I don't know where to find that from. And I think that Crisis's guide or order here is a really nice compromise between my slightly looser, slightly broader definition of reading orders, and a much more compulsive Reddit-focused panel by panel, word for word reading guide. All right, thanks for watching that bit. Let's close out the video. And there we have it. I hope you found that useful. Like I say, this is just something that kind of just came out of the woodwork while I was doing my DC Rebirth guide. I read Rorschach and then just kind of worked backwards a bit. I'd already read a lot of the stuff on here, like Before Watchmen, and I've already seen the HBO special and bits and pieces. Some stuff I hadn't seen before, so I hadn't watched the Watchmen animated universe. And I wasn't aware that even was a video game, which is slightly embarrassing given that I've just released a big series on video games as a one-off video game thing. So I am picking up the Watchmen video game. I will post a review of it in case anyone cares, but if you don't, I won't. And otherwise, yeah, hopefully this was useful. What you can see here is I'm showing you a slightly tweaked version of the map that I just used for recording the video earlier today, just to make it slightly neater in terms of indicating that the DC Rebirth and rather the New 52 stuff does come after Alan Moore's 1985 series. Yeah, hopefully that makes it a little bit clearer. Otherwise, as always, thanks for watching, everyone. Please like, comment, subscribe. If you want to support the channel, then I would strongly recommend picking up the first volume of my prose episodic novel about superheroes and superheroics. Completely original stuff, completely original universe. Um, Keen to carry on or start promoting that a bit more. And yeah, otherwise, enjoy comics however you like. Have fun, stay classy, and I'll catch you all next time.